There's something about INFPs that doesn't hit you all at once. It creeps up on you. At first, they seem quiet, maybe even distant. But the more you interact with them, the more you realize there's a depth there that most people don't have the patience or the capacity to fully understand. And that's exactly where the obsession begins. INFPs don't present themselves loudly. They're not trying to impress anyone. And ironically, that's part of what makes them so magnetic. In a world where people are constantly performing, curating their personalities, and trying to be seen, INFPs feel real. They don't oversell themselves. They don't chase attention. And because of that, when they do open up, it feels earned. It feels personal, like you've been let into something private. They have this inner world that is incredibly rich. Most people operate on the surface. What's happening right now? What's practical? What's obvious? INFPs are constantly processing meaning, emotion, symbolism. They don't just experience life, they interpret it. So when they talk about something, it's rarely shallow. Even a simple conversation can suddenly turn deep without feeling forced. That kind of depth pulls people in, especially those who feel like they've never really been understood. And then there's the way they see people. INFPs have a tendency to look beyond what's obvious. They don't just see who you are on the surface. They see who you could be. They pick up on things you didn't even realize about yourself. They notice your contradictions, your quiet struggles, your unspoken thoughts. And when they reflect that back to you, it can feel almost unsettling, but also deeply validating. For a lot of people, that kind of attention is rare. Most interactions are transactional or shallow. But with an INFP, it feels like you matter on a deeper level. Like someone is actually trying to understand you, not just interact with you. That alone is enough to create attachment, but it goes further than that. If you've been searching for a way to understand yourself better, I've created something for you. It's called Life Purpose Compass Toolkit. It's designed to help you find your passion, enjoy your career, reach your potential, and live a life of meaning, purpose, and fulfillment. You'll find the link in the description of this video. INFPs are also selective. They don't open up to everyone. They don't give their full energy to just anyone. So when they choose you, when they let you into their world, it feels significant. People start to associate that feeling with the INFP themselves. It's not just that they enjoy being around them, it's that they feel chosen, and that creates a kind of emotional imprint. There's also a softness to INFPs that contrasts sharply with how harsh the world can be. They tend to be gentle in how they speak, thoughtful in how they respond, and careful with people's emotions. That doesn't mean they're weak. It means they're intentional. And for people who are used to being misunderstood, judged, or dismissed, that gentleness can feel almost addictive. But what really fuels the obsession is the mystery. INFPs don't reveal everything at once. Even if you've known them for a long time, there's still parts of them you haven't seen. They have layers, and those layers don't open on demand. This creates a kind of psychological pull. People feel like there's always more to discover, more to understand. And the human mind is naturally drawn to what it can't fully grasp. At the same time, INFPs can be unpredictable emotionally, not in a chaotic way, but in a way that keeps people engaged. One moment they're deeply expressive, the next they're withdrawn and introspective. This inconsistency creates a kind of push-pull dynamic that can intensify attachment. When they pull back, people feel the absence. When they return, it feels meaningful again. They also tend to idealize connections. When an INFP cares about you, it's not casual. They invest emotionally. They think about you, reflect on your words, remember small details. And that level of attention can make people feel special in a way they're not used to. But it also raises the emotional stakes. Once someone experiences that depth, it's hard to go back to ordinary interactions. Another factor is that INFPs don't try to control people. They give space. They allow others to be themselves without pressure. That freedom can be disarming. People are used to relationships that come with expectations, demands, or subtle manipulation. With an INFP, it feels different. It feels like you're accepted without needing to perform. And that kind of acceptance is rare enough to become something people cling to. But there's also a tension in all of this. INFPs don't always stay accessible. They retreat into their inner world when they need to process things. And during those times, they can seem distant or unreachable. This creates a gap, and that gap often intensifies the emotional pull. People start to chase the connection, trying to get back to the closeness they felt before. What makes it even more complex is that INFPs don't always realize the effect they have. They're not trying to create obsession. They're just being themselves, introspective, emotionally aware, selective, and authentic. But those traits, when combined, create a presence that stands out in a very specific way. So people don't just like INFPs. They get pulled in by them. Not because INFPs are trying to attract attention, but because they offer something that's increasingly rare: depth, sincerity, and a sense that there's always more beneath the surface. And once someone experiences that, it's hard to forget. There's also the way INFPs handle emotion that quietly hooks people in. They don't rush feelings or treat them like something to fix or get over. They sit with them. They process them. When someone opens up to an INFP, they don't get cut off with advice or brushed aside with cliches. They feel heard in a way that's calm and unforced. Over time, people start to associate emotional safety with that one person, and that creates a dependency that can slowly turn into obsession. INFPs also have a habit of expressing themselves in ways that linger. It might be something they say, a message they send, or even the way they describe a moment. There's a kind of poetic weight to their communication, even when they're not trying to be poetic. They choose words carefully, and those words tend to stick. People replay conversations with them in their minds, not because they're overthinking, but because what was said actually meant something. Another thing that pulls people in is how INFPs don't chase validation. They're not constantly looking for approval or trying to fit into what others expect. That quiet independence creates a subtle tension. People are used to dynamics where attention is exchanged or earned. But with an INFP, there's a sense that they'll be who they are regardless of how you respond. That makes their attention feel more valuable when it's given, because it's not something they hand out freely or strategically. INFPs also tend to bring out parts of people that don't usually come forward. Their presence makes others more reflective, more open, sometimes even more honest than they intended to be. It's not because the INFP is pushing them, but because the environment feels safe enough for those parts to surface. And once someone starts associating that kind of self-discovery with a person, they begin to feel like they need that person to access those parts of themselves again. There's a quiet intensity in how INFPs care. It's not loud or dramatic, but it runs deep. They don't forget easily. They remember emotional details, the tone behind your words, the things you didn't say directly. That kind of attentiveness can feel almost overwhelming to someone who isn't used to being seen that clearly. It creates a sense that nothing about them goes unnoticed, which can be both comforting and addictive. INFPs also tend to move at their own pace, especially in relationships. They're not easily rushed into emotional commitments, and they don't escalate things just because it's expected. That slow unfolding can make people lean in more. It builds anticipation. It makes every small step feel significant. Instead of everything happening quickly and fading just as fast, the connection develops in a way that keeps people mentally and emotionally invested. Then there's the contrast between how INFPs appear and who they actually are. On the surface, they might seem reserved, even a bit detached. But underneath that is a strong set of values, deep feelings, and a surprisingly firm sense of identity. When people start to see that contrast, it creates a kind of fascination. It feels like discovering something hidden, something not everyone gets to see. INFPs also don't react in predictable ways. They're guided more by their inner values than by social expectations. So sometimes they respond to situations in ways that catch people off guard, not in a dramatic or erratic sense, but in a way that feels authentic and unfiltered. That unpredictability keeps people paying attention, trying to understand how the INFP thinks and what they'll do next. There's also the way INFPs handle conflict. They don't usually jump into arguments or try to dominate conversations. They withdraw, reflect, and then come back with something thoughtful and measured. This can create a delayed emotional response that people don't expect. It leaves an impression, because instead of reacting impulsively, the INFP responds in a way that feels considered and intentional. INFPs also tend to create emotional contrast in people's lives. When someone spends time with them, things feel deeper, slower, more meaningful. Then when they go back to their normal interactions, everything else can feel a bit flat in comparison. Conversations might feel more surface level, connections less engaging. That contrast makes the time spent with the INFP stand out even more, which strengthens the pull. Another factor is that INFPs often mirror emotional energy without copying it. If someone is open, they respond with depth. If someone is guarded, they remain respectful but distant. This creates a feedback loop where people feel like they're influencing the connection, even though the INFP is simply responding authentically. That sense of control, mixed with uncertainty, can keep people mentally hooked. And then there's the fact that INFPs don't fully explain themselves. Not because they're trying to be mysterious, but because a lot of what they feel is internal and hard to put into words. They might leave things unsaid, or express only part of what's going on inside them. That lack of full clarity gives people space to fill in the gaps, to interpret, to wonder. And the more someone tries to make sense of something incomplete, the more they think about it. There's also the way INFPs relate to meaning itself that pulls people deeper in. Most people move through life reacting to what's in front of them, but INFPs are always asking what it means. Not out loud all the time, but internally. So when they engage with someone, they're not just interacting, they're quietly attaching significance to moments, conversations, even small gestures. When that comes through, even subtly, it makes ordinary interactions feel heavier, like they matter more than they usually would. People start to feel like what they have with an INFP isn't just another connection. It's something that means something. INFPs also have a strong internal compass that doesn't bend easily. They're not easily swayed by trends, pressure, or what everyone else thinks is right. That kind of quiet conviction stands out, especially in a world where people constantly adjust themselves to fit in. Even when others don't fully understand their decisions, they can sense that the INFP is being real. And that authenticity creates a kind of respect that slowly turns into fascination. Another aspect is how INFPs detach when something doesn't align with them. They don't always explain it in detail. They just pull back. No drama, no big scene, just a shift in energy. That kind of withdrawal can feel confusing to people who are used to more direct or expressive reactions. It leaves questions unanswered, and unanswered questions tend to stay in people's minds longer than clear endings ever do. INFPs also tend to live in a kind of emotional contrast between hope and realism. They can see the flaws in people and situations very clearly, but they still hold on to an ideal of what things could be. That mix creates a unique tension in how they relate to others. They're not blindly optimistic, but they're also not cynical. Being around that balance can feel refreshing, especially for people who lean too far in either direction. There's also something about how INFPs experience beauty. Not just physical beauty, but beauty in ideas, moments, and emotions. They notice things that others overlook and react to them in ways that feel genuine. When they share that perspective, it can shift how someone else sees the world. And once someone starts associating that new way of seeing things with the INFP, it becomes harder to separate the two. INFPs also don't rush to define relationships. They let things exist in a kind of open space for a while. That lack of immediate labeling can create both comfort and tension. Comfort, because there's no pressure. Tension, because there's no clear structure. And that tension keeps people thinking, trying to figure out where they stand, what the connection really is, and where it's going. There's a quiet resilience in INFPs that isn't obvious at first. They might seem soft, but they endure things internally that most people don't see. When glimpses of that resilience show up, through something they say or how they handle a situation, it can shift how people perceive them completely. What once seemed gentle now also feels strong, and that combination is rare enough to hold attention. They also have a way of making silence feel full instead of awkward. Many people rely on constant conversation to maintain connection, but INFPs are comfortable with quiet. And in that quiet, there's still a sense of presence that can be surprisingly powerful because it removes the pressure to perform or fill space and instead creates a different kind of closeness. INFPs often follow their own internal timing when it comes to expression. They might hold something in for a while, then suddenly express it in a way that feels complete and well-formed. That delayed expression can catch people off guard, especially when it reveals depth that wasn't obvious before. It adds another layer to the sense that there's always more going on beneath the surface. There's also the way INFPs don't try to win people over. They're not strategizing how to be liked or how to keep someone interested. In fact, they're often more focused on whether something feels right to them than on whether it's working. That lack of strategic behavior makes their actions feel more genuine, and people tend to trust what feels uncalculated. Over time, all of these things combine into a very specific experience. It's not loud, it's not obvious, and it's not something that happens instantly. But it builds. It stays in the back of people's minds. It shows up in how often they think about the INFP, how they compare others to them, how they replay moments and conversations. It's not just attraction. It's not just admiration. It's the feeling that there's something there that they haven't fully figured out yet, and the need to understand it keeps pulling them back in. If you've been searching for a way to understand yourself better, I've created something for you. It's called the Life Purpose Compass Toolkit. It's designed to help you find your passion, enjoy your career, reach your potential, and live a life of meaning, purpose, and fulfillment. You'll find the link in the description of this video.